portable microphone before asking your question. All right, so we'll go to a question in the room right now. Une question dans la salle, s'il vous plaît. Okay, microphone to the lady right here. The microphone. Okay.
Hi, Taryn Grant with Star Metro. What kind of comparisons can you make to historical storms that have hit Nova Scotia in the past?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
What comparisons can you make between Dorian and storms that have hit Nova Scotia in the past?
This one is certainly going to be up there in terms of impacts. We know what kind of impacts that we get with winds of over 120 kilometers per hour this time of year with all the leaves on the trees. So what we should expect are things like uprooted trees, broken trees. That may result in extended power outages. Those are all the things that we know happen when we get these kinds of conditions.
And are there any named storms that this resembles so far in the way that it's tracking?
It's always tricky to compare storms because storms arrive at different times of year with different preconditions. Sometimes the ground is saturated, sometimes it's not. So it's always difficult to compare one storm against the other.
All right, we are going to go to another question in the room right now, and we ask that you please do limit it to one question and one follow-up. So, are there any other questions in the room?
Are there anything, my name's Kieran Kenny, we're at the coast. We have a couple surfers in the province who are getting pretty excited about the potential waves coming. Do you have any sort of advice or words for them as they get on the water?
Well, the advice would be to stay away from those waves, but we do expect some fairly large waves to arrive along the Atlantic coast, probably late afternoon tomorrow into the evening. But those conditions can be extremely dangerous, and unfortunately we've lost a number of people that have been swept away by these waves over the years with just these types of storms.
Mr. Robichaud.
Yep.
Just wait, sorry, until we give you the mic. Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Robichaud. Can you describe this storm in comparison to Juan, please?
Well, Juan was a Category 2 when it made landfall. In terms of the track, there might be some similarities there. But the strongest winds that we saw with Juan were 176 kilometers per hour here at McNabb's Island. We don't expect anything quite that strong. However, there may be winds that are actually extend over a larger area than Hurricane Juan did. So some of the impacts might be a bit spread out more over different parts of the Maritimes as opposed to concentrated in this area.
And can you describe the risk to coastal communities, please?
Yeah, along the along the Atlantic coast, as I mentioned earlier, we are going to get some pretty significant waves coming onto the coast tomorrow late in the afternoon into the evening hours, and then overnight hours in eastern Nova Scotia and into Sunday in Newfoundland. So those waves are going to be the really important part of the coastal risk at this particular stage. Storm surge is always an issue with the hurricanes. Luckily, the storm is arriving at low tide, at least for the eastern shore area, so that might mitigate some of the damage we might see. We're also looking at the risk for potential elevated water levels in the Gulf of St. Lawrence as well, so it's not just going to be an Atlantic coast issue.
That track that we're looking at right now,
right?
Where is it making landfall? Where do you expect it to first hit Nova Scotia?
The best estimate right now is somewhere near Halifax or just east of Halifax. This represents the latest track right now, but I know that our forecasters are working on the update for 3 p.m. And from my discussions with them just before coming up here, the plan is to move that track a little bit more towards Halifax.
And you had mentioned a little further west. So at one point during your initial presentation, so does that mean further south in Nova Scotia along the coast?
That would be further down the coast, yes. Yeah.
Okay. Smaller communities?
Yeah.
Do you have any sense of when it becomes a tropical storm?
Excuse me, just one second.
Can you describe when it becomes a tropical storm versus a hurricane?
Talking about tropical versus post-tropical, all we're talking about is the structure of the storm. We're saying
Aussi victime d'une sorte de grande averse la semaine dernière avec Erin. Est-ce que les pluies aujourd'hui, les grandes vagues que vous avez mentionnées peuvent encore avoir un impact puis peut-être même causer d'importantes inondations? À quoi on doit s'attendre?
Oui, du côté des vagues, pas tellement. Ce qu'on parle de comparaison avec ce qu'on a eu la semaine passée, mais si on regarde les régions qui sont plus à risque d'avoir le plus de précipitations, c'est les mêmes régions qui ont été affectées par Erin la semaine passée. Donc, c'est certainement, ça va être une zone à surveiller, l'ouest de la Nouvelle-Écosse, la vallée de l'Annapolis. C'est là qu'on prévoit les pluies les plus abondantes si on a une trajectoire comme qu'on l'a présentement.
Et pouvez-vous aussi répéter en français la réponse que vous venez de mentionner, là, la différence entre un ouragan et une tempête tropicale?
Oui, quand on parle de tempête tropicale versus post-tropicale, on parle de la structure de la tempête, pas nécessairement de l'intensité de la tempête. Donc, on prévoit que Dorian va arriver sur la côte de la Nouvelle-Écosse comme un ouragan, mais se transformer en tempête post-tropicale, mais de force d'ouragan. Ça fait qu'on parle quand même d'une tempête très intense qui va se diriger vers Terre-Neuve.
Merci.
How many hurricanes have made landfall in Nova Scotia, and what was the most recent one?
The most recent one was Earl in 2010. I don't have the number off the top of my head of how many, but there have been many over the years. And the database goes back to the 1800s, 1842, I believe.
What would be the frequency?
We tend to get tropical weather systems affecting Canada in one way or another, usually about once a year on average. This year we're already at 2. We typically have about 2 to 3 that actually enter our Canadian Hurricane Center response zone, which is a much larger area covering some of the offshore areas as well.
Jesse Thomas with Global News. I know some people are scrambling to get their amenities. Some people have been downplaying the storm, but can you give us, again, a timeline when we expect to see landfall?
Yeah, I have to make the distinction between landfall and when the impacts are going to start to occur. I think we're going to start to see the winds start to increase tomorrow morning in western Nova Scotia. That should propagate across the province late morning into the afternoon hours. So we're looking at a fairly nasty late afternoon over much of the southern Maritimes. Then the really strong winds will arrive with the center of the storm, which should be in the evening to overnight hours. So the worst conditions should happen tomorrow night.
Can you talk about the effect, if any, of climate change on the intensity of storms like this?
Well, where the science is right now with respect to climate change and tropical cyclones is that we may end up in slightly stronger storms, in a warmer climate, but the frequency might not be quite as high as it is now. So that's kind of where things lie with that.
Again, waters and the warmth of the waters, the coolness of the waters, is that are we a little bit warmer or not this year?
It is a little bit warmer out there now, and it looks like the track might actually move over one of those patches of warm water, which would explain partially why we have such a strong storm when it arrives tomorrow.
Is that a climate change matter?
No. We usually get these warm eddies that form in the ocean over the course of the year, and they might migrate towards us and then move away, that sort of thing. It's just a timing thing in this particular case.
Okay.
Are there any other questions in the room?
I'm just wondering if you could pick one slide, and since you're on a wireless, just kind of guide us along.
Yep.
Whatever slide you think is most appropriate.
Okay, if you go to the previous one, go back again. All right, so here's the storm now as of about a couple hours ago. So it's moving in a northeasterly direction, and it's going to continue to do so. This time frame is tomorrow evening. So tomorrow evening we have the center of the storm just off the coast of Nova Scotia. Again, if our forecasters do end up moving this track a little bit further towards the west, this is going to be very close. The center of the storm is going to be very close to Halifax tomorrow evening around 9 p.m. From there, it's going to continue across Nova Scotia into the Gulf of St. Lawrence, headed towards Newfoundland as a very, very strong, potent post-tropical storm. But as I said earlier, if you can see on the satellite image, you can see some of the cloud shield from the storm itself actually already moving into the southwestern part of the province. So no precipitation yet, but we do expect the precipitation and the winds, for that matter, to actually start affecting Nova Scotia prior to the arrival of the center of the storm.
Can you give us an idea of what people can expect to see in terms of impact and what people should watch out for in terms of safety measures?
Absolutely. We know that when we get winds this strong this time of year, that we are going to get uprooted trees. We're going to get broken trees. We know, for example, with Hurricane Juan, for example, although it was a Category 2 storm when it made landfall, the tree damage was more consistent with a Category 3. So we tend to get really bad tree damage when we get 120 plus kilometer per hour winds on a day like today or tomorrow when the leaves are still on the trees. So I think that's going to be the major impact. Flooding, of course, when we get rainfall rates that exceed 20 millimeters per hour, which is very, very possible with this, almost likely. That overwhelms many systems, and you tend to get flash flooding when you get those kinds of heavy rainfalls.
In some cases, depending on where it sits, one side is rain, one side is wind.
Yep.
Is this both that it is going to hit us?
Very good question. We are going to see a kind of dissection between the wind and the rain hazard. The rain is definitely going to be on the left-hand side of the track, wherever that track ends up being. The strongest winds are going to be on the right, but we can't exclude the potential for strong winds just as the storm is going by. So after the storm goes by, there's some strong winds that may develop out of the southwest or out of the west that could be, damaging winds as well. So that's another thing we're going to have to watch out for.
The lifeline is the Chignecto Isthmus.
Yep.
Is it okay in this case? Is the tidal surge such that it's not going to overcome the Trans-Canada?
Yeah, based on this track, we wouldn't expect issues there with that, no. If this was further west, then like going up the Bay of Fundy, that might be a different story. But for now, with this track, that area should be fine.
Just a question, hypothetically, do you expect this to affect the bridges here?
The
closure?
bridges,
Yeah.
typically we would see winds with this that would result in some kind of restriction. You'd have to ask them to see exactly what their plans are, but we would see winds strong enough to have an impact area.
Okay, it looks like that covers our questions in the room. Unfortunately, due to technical difficulties, we're going to ask that Bob represent the information for the participants on the phone. So if we could just restart the presentation, and Bob, if you could quickly run through what you've already stated. Pour ceux au téléphone, on va répéter la présentation. Alors, je vous présente Bob Robichaud, meteor.
This time right in front so we get better shots of him gesturing to it because it's too wide for most of us.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we get a bonus that way.
All right.
All for bonuses. So in both languages?
Yes, please.
Okay. So as of earlier today, Dorian made landfall in the Carolinas as a Category 1 hurricane. It has started this move towards the northeast, which we've been anticipating now for a few days. It is accelerating towards the Maritimes. Next slide. So right now the track that we have here at the Canadian Hurricane Center is for the storm to make landfall along the Atlantic coast of Nova Scotia during the evening hours of Saturday. If anybody's watching this online, what we see here is essentially a track that shows the storm making landfall just slightly east of the Halifax area. Our forecasters are working on the new track that goes out at 3 p.m. Atlantic, and what we what we plan on doing is nudging that track very slightly westward so that it gets it actually comes really close to the Halifax area. Next slide. Be that as it may, errors in forecasting tropical cyclones 24 hours ahead of time are still, we're still looking about 80 kilometers on either side of that particular track. So a track coming up southwestern Nova Scotia or another one going through Cape Breton is still on the table, but the most likely scenario is for the storm to come up somewhere along the central area of the Atlantic coast of Nova Scotia. In terms of wind speeds, we expect that the wind speed should be greatest to the right-hand side of the track. So we could expect winds certainly in excess of 100 kilometers per hour, potentially in some locations reaching up to 130, 40, or 150 even in some of the higher gusts. Next slide. In terms of rainfall, we expect the rainfall to be to the left-hand side of the track, with maximum rainfall amounts of 100 to 150 millimeters, and that would be over western parts of Nova Scotia, and some lesser amounts, 50 to 100 millimeters, in a larger area of western Nova Scotia, southeastern New Brunswick, and the western part of Prince Edward Island, and lesser amounts as you go up into Newfoundland and Labrador. All right. Donc, l'image que vous voyez, c'est une image satellite qui a été prise à 12h30 heure de l'Atlantique. Lors de son passage sur les Carolines ce matin, on a vu des vents de